really cool to see so many people here. And even so, the semester hasn't even kicked off yet, so I can imagine we'll have even more people every week from now on. We might have to bring 3 tables here, which if we do, that's going to be cool. Welcome to the one person who's new here, and the rest of you, you know the story, even if you've been absent for a while. So if you open your Bibles to the book of 1 Samuel, I think everyone can find that. If not, just ask the person next to you. I debated with myself how to go about this, because there's obviously 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, and there's no real gap between the 2 books historically. They just transition one into the other. And so I thought about doing 1 and 2 Samuel in 2 separate lessons, but in the end, because it's basically the same story, I figured let's just do both of them at the same time. So here's my kind of ploy for you guys. If you think that we need to go more in depth in each individual book, I'm willing to go back and do a separate lesson on each of them. But grab her. My daughter grabbed the leftover pizzas. Yeah, that's great. It's finished the pizza. Yeah. And so if you want me to go more in depth on both books, then you just say the word. Personally, I think we can cover everything here. And I was expecting to write at least a page, 2-3 pages of notes, but I only have 1 page here. So my experience of doing that is I come into the session thinking, I'm going to speak for like 20 minutes maybe, and then I end up speaking for an hour. So strap yourselves in, guys, because we could be here for a while. Enthusiasm? Yay! All right. So 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, looking to God. We live in a faithless world. Would you all agree with that? That the world around us, not necessarily churches or us individually, but the world around us is completely faithless and godless, right? And when we think about that, we kind of hearken back to the end of Judges, where in verse 25 of chapter 21 we read, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." That attitude comes into our day as well. Yes, we have rulers, we might have a king, although Romania doesn't have a king anymore, but Britain certainly does. But we have prime ministers or presidents, people that run our country, yet people seem to just do whatever they want. They are allowed to raise their hand and say, I believe this, and because I believe this, you're not allowed to believe that. The people that say, well, I want to believe this, and I don't think you're allowed to believe that, get kicked to the curb and told, you're not allowed to believe that. So we live in a very godless society these days, which very much reflects the society at the time of 1 Samuel. And as I mentioned last week when we saw the book of Ruth, chronologically, we go straight from Judges into Samuel. Ruth is a story that happens within the book of, within the timeline of Judges. And so you would, if you were reading an old Bible, as I understand it, an old Torah, or the Talmud, or the Mishnah, or anything like that, commentary-wise, it would go straight from the end of Judges straight into 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. So you would read, in those times, anyone did whatever they wanted, and then suddenly you're thrown into the book of Samuel. In our chronology of our Bibles, the book of Ruth kind of breaks that up a little bit and gives you this nice little story that makes you think, oh, things aren't that bad, and then throws you back into Samuel where you're like, oh no, things are going bad again. So, but historically, it was just bad, right? And so that's where our narrative is at right now. Yet, there have always been evil times, yet despite those evil times, there has always been hope and remnants of people of faith, right? All the way through history. And I believe that that will always be the case. As long as we have a Bible, which I'm sure we always will, there is hope for the gospel to reach the world. As long as we are faithful, there will always be a remnant of Christian believers in the world. And so we will never be extinguished completely from this world. There will be times where the church is doing really well. You think about the time in the 1800s in Britain and America with the Great Awakening. That was a time of great prosperity for the gospel. And then there are other times like our day where it just seems like wherever you go, no one's a believer and no one wants to trust in Jesus. And so what I want to say with that really is that we should expect society to go rotten. I think that's kind of the problem of 1 Samuel and Judges. They think we've got this great ruler now, and so everything's going to be great, and then everything falls apart still. And that's exactly why they ended up asking for a king, because they thought that would be their kind of salvation from all their problems. only to find that there are many wicked kings that did evil things. So the thing I want us to think about just as we go into 1 Samuel is 2 Timothy 3, verse 13. While evil people and imposters will go on from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. Okay, so the point there is that historically, we can't expect things to get better. Theoretically, things are going to keep getting worse, but there are times like the Great Awakening where there are blips. There's Charles Spurgeon preaching in the 1800s, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones in England. In various places and in various times, there are little blips in history where things aren't seemingly so bad for the gospel. But the generality of what Scripture is teaching us is that things are going from worse to worse to worse until the end of history. Okay, and that's why, just I'll slip this in here, that's why I'm not a post-millennialist. That's why I don't believe that there'll be 1,000 years and then Jesus will return and all of that stuff. Because that whole theology is based on things getting better and the gospel penetrating all of society and us having these Christian nations. No, that's not what the Bible's saying. Things are going to get worse and worse and worse. Okay. And so when we see the evil things that are happening in this world, we shouldn't be surprised. We should be like, well, this world is fallen. Of course, this sort of stuff is going to happen. So when people are assassinated, or when more and more abortion clinics are opening, or there's parades celebrating sin, when all these things are happening and we seem surprised by them, we shouldn't be, because the Bible tells us things are going to go from bad to worse. And so that's why what we need to keep in mind as we study 1 and 2 Samuel. Things were really bad when Samuel became judge. He managed to improve things, and then King Saul takes over, and things go bad again. Then David takes over, things get better. Solomon kind of okay as well, but then after that, there's hardly any kings in all of Israel that did good. And we'll talk about that next week. But the idea is just there to keep before us constantly. Our hope is not in the nation doing well. Our hope isn't even in whether the church prospers across the whole world. Our hope is in the gospel of Jesus Christ and nothing else. And so that's just a little eschatological thing, a theology of the end times to keep in mind. Whether you're post-millennial, pre-millennial, or amillennial, it doesn't matter. We've got to keep our focus on Jesus, right? And so that sets us to understand the books of Samuel. Faithful people, like Samuel or David, living in faithless times, just like we do, okay? And so as far as the author of these books goes, does anyone want to stab a guess at who wrote them? No? Samuel, right? That's funny. When I was doing my first year of college, I came in late to a class and the professor said, "Robert, who was the first prophet?" And I was like, "Isaiah!" And he was like, "Ha ha, gotcha." Yeah, no one knows who wrote Samuel. Likely it was many different fragments of different texts all kind of slammed together. That seems to be the case if you read 2 Chronicles 29, verse 29, which we do have a moment, so I will just read you that. 2 Chronicles 29, 29. And if I'm speaking too fast, just raise your hand and say, oh, did I write the Bible verse down wrong? Okay, I do apologize. I'll have to rectify that in the notes. There's a verse in 2 Chronicles. You can Google it if you have a moment, and just let me know if you find it. But it says that there were records of David, records of Samuel, records of Saul, and that if you want to learn more about them, you can read those books, but we don't have those books today. So my belief is that fragments from each of those books were collected together and put onto a scroll, which then became what we have today as 1 and 2 Samuel. If maybe it was 1 Chronicles. I don't know. If someone can find that and just say at the end, that would be awesome. I think Daniel's already furiously searching for it.
Oh, no, I'm messaging.
Oh, he's messaging. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being present.
Sorry.
So obviously the context of these books is to show us the establishment of the monarchy in Israel, which we'll get to. But what about difficulties with the book? And I have 5 different things here that we can talk about, and we can talk about those now, and then we don't have to worry about them in the narrative setting. First of all, we have the story of the witch at Endor. Who's familiar with that story? Yeah? Not Star Wars, not the moon of Endor. We're talking about...
where he tries to summon the dead.
Yeah, exactly. So King Saul is terrified about what's going to happen, and so he goes to a spirit medium and asks her to speak to Samuel and give him a message from the dead, basically. And then, obviously, she's shocked when someone actually does appear. It's very clear in the narrative. And then Samuel says, today, tomorrow, or whenever, you will be with me, indicating that he's going to die. So the difficulty with that is, did this woman actually communicate with the soul of Samuel, or is this some demonic deception going on here? I don't know. I don't think it's possible for us to communicate with the dead. So I'm gonna say there's a possibility that there was an exception on this case to further God's plan and to further solidify Saul's condemnation, just because there was an opportunity for him to repent there. I've done bad, and that may have been the grace of God, but I'm inclined to say it was just a demon taking advantage of the situation. And you can agree with that or disagree with it. It doesn't really make too much difference. So, but I don't believe that he talked to Samuel there. Saul's death in the end of 1 Samuel has him kind of pathetically saying, "Oh, I don't want my enemies to kill me," so says to this guy, "Kill me," and then he doesn't do it, so he ends up falling on his own sword. And then when you turn onto the second book of Samuel, we have this guy running up to King David saying, "I killed King Saul," and he's like, "Hang on a second, there's a problem here because he didn't do that." And then what happens then? That guy actually gets killed by David because he killed Saul, right? So the way I see to deal with the differences between those two reports is that Saul had a desire for that to happen. It didn't get fulfilled, but then that guy thought he could run back to David and say, "Hey, look, I killed Saul." And so David's like, "Well, if you killed the king of Israel, you deserve to die." And so his own little ploy to make himself famous on the basis of a lie was used against him. So that one's pretty easy to deal with. It's kind of hard when you read 1 Samuel and go straight into 2 Samuel. It's like, well, there's a problem here. Like, these two accounts don't match, but it's actually really simple to resolve. Another problem is King Saul prophesying. Does anyone here believe that Saul was saved and will be with us in heaven? No? Good. You're all online with me then. But we have a moment where Saul starts prophesying, don't we? So how can someone be prophesying if they're not from God? And that becomes an interpretation problem. And I think the simple way is to remember that there are plenty of false teachers out there that still say things that are true sometimes. And sometimes, on very rare occasions, those teachers that say those things somehow can be used by God to bring people to faith. Okay, I am not saying that that's a normality. I am not bolstering false teachers in any sort of way. I'm just saying that there is a possibility that a false teacher could say Jesus is Lord, and that's what someone needs to hear to come to faith, and then they actually do truly come to faith, come away from all the false teaching, and that's all I'm saying. And so as far as God allowing Saul to prophesy, I think there's more of a case of his just kind of proclaiming in this instance. He's not giving a prophecy in the revelation sense that he's giving God's word. He's just proclaiming what's going on, which if you look at Hebrew and Greek studies, you'll see that there's a lot of similarity between how we deal with those words. Related to what Jan just asked me, what do we do about David dancing? David, when the ark is returned, gets naked basically and starts dancing in front of the servant ladies. And then his wife gets very upset with him and basically yells at him, as wives are very good at doing. And ask Natty, he's the newlywed. So the question is, like, what's going on here? Is this okay? Like, is it okay for David to dance here, or is it not okay? Personally, I think everyone messed up in that situation. The wife should not have been angry with him. He was expressing his joy in something. She had no right to be angry with him and say, "I don't know, what are you doing?" But at the same time, it was inappropriate, in my view, what David was doing. God had not left any instructions for the people to dance before the ark the way he was doing, but at the same time, he was just expressing his own personal joy. As far as applying that to the church goes, you can't, because it's not doctrine, it's just what someone's doing. If you want to justify and talk about dancing in church services, that's a whole other conversation, but this can't be used to justify, because it's a separate context from what's happening in the church today. It's Israel in the Old Testament, a different time, a different covenant, and it's just one person's personal expression. He's not in any way saying everyone should do this, and then that becomes our worship of God. Okay. Finally, as a difficulty, we have Uzzah. Who knows who Uzzah is? Well, Natty knows. Uzzah is a man who, while the ark was being escorted, saw the ark about to kind of fall, the oxen stumbled, and what does he do? He puts his hand out and touches the ark to stabilize it. Who knows what happens to him afterwards? He dies, right? He's gone, struck dead by God, very clear in the narrative. So how is that fair? Like, he was just trying to help God, right? He's just trying to put his hand out to keep the ark from falling. Well, the reality is that this teaches us about the holiness of God. When he gives us a command and a rule and a law to follow, we need to follow it. We need to observe those things. And so in Uzzah's case, he knew that he wasn't supposed to touch the ark. Yes, it was a reaction in the moment, like, oh no, the ark's going to fall, but he knew he shouldn't touch it. And so God is demonstrating his almighty sovereignty, his almighty holiness to the whole nation of Israel, I believe, as an act of grace to them so that no one else makes the same mistake. And I don't believe that Uzzah was condemned to hell for that. I believe he went to heaven. Through that, God is just teaching the people, I am holy. You need to do what I tell you to do. Okay, so if that satisfies all of your difficulties with the books of Samuel, that's great. If not, then we can debate it at the end. For now, let's get to the practicalities of what the book is trying to teach us. And I know we've gone already quite a long time in those difficulties, but we'll try and shoot through this. So the basic purpose of this book, other than to teach us historically about the monarchy being established, is to teach us to look to God even when other people don't. So 1 and 2 Samuel teach us to look to God, to be faithful to God, even when everyone around us is lacking in faithfulness. So it all starts at the time of the judges. As I said, we have this woman, Hannah. She's desperate for a child, and she prays to God, if you give me a child, I'll dedicate him to you. And that's exactly what happens. She has a child called Samuel, and Samuel is then dedicated to the Lord, and he goes to join Eli, who is, I don't know what Eli's position was. Was he a high priest? Was he a priest? Yeah, high priest. He was a high priest at the time. And something I should have made sure of before I came here, sorry. So all these little tiny details, they escape me. The older I get, the easier it is to lose those things. So Samuel's dedicated to him as a boy, and God says very clearly, you need to set this boy aside for me because he's going to serve me. And Samuel is eventually installed as the next and final judge of Israel. And he's doing that in tough times. He's doing that in times where judges have come, they've messed up everything. He's coming at a time where Israel's enemies are on their doorstep, coming to invade and take down the people. He's doing it at the time where irreligiosity and idolatry are very much becoming prevalent in the nation of Israel. And so as he becomes the judge of Israel, he says the amazing words in chapter 7, verses 3 and 4. And Samuel said to all the house of Israel, if you're returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. How many of us can preach one word, one sentence in a sermon and get everyone to do what we want, right? Not many people have that ability. I certainly don't. I have to go on these big, long excursions explaining everything to people, and then maybe they'll listen to me, and then maybe if they listen to me, they'll change. Samuel just says, no, take away the gods, the false gods and the idols, and then they're like, oh, sure, yeah, we'll do that. So it's just amazing testimony to God's grace there. So faithful Samuel has now called Israel to faithfulness, and it seems like things are going to turn around again, and Samuel's going to lead Israel into this new golden age where they've rejected idolatry and they're going to follow the one true God again. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. The people are not happy with the way things are going politically, and they're looking all around them and they're saying, well, every other nation around us has a king. We should be like the other nations. And immediately that's a problem, right? Because God said, you're not to be like the other nations, you're to be different. And just as a little side note, which I didn't put in my notes, we can often be like that in the church, right? We can say, well, the world around us is doing X, Y, and Z, and so we want those people in the world to come to us, so we're going to conform our churches and our church services to what those X, Y, Zs are in culture, so that people will want to come to church. Now, I think in a lot of cases, people have sincere desires in doing that, but ultimately the culture then ends up conducing the church. Conducing is Romanian, what's the word? Leading the church. And that becomes a problem, and that's exactly what Israel is doing. Israel is being faithless in asking for a king when God should be her king. And we do that in our churches as well, when we say what God has inscribed for us in Scripture as our process of how we should be is not good enough. Let's go to the culture and let culture dictate how we do things. And so Israel is asking for a king. Chapter 8, verses 4-9, we read, "Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, 'Behold, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations.' But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, 'Give us a king to judge us.' And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, 'Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds that they have done, from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice, only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them.'" So you see that Samuel is upset there, but God is saying, let them have it. I didn't write this down, but one of the commentaries I read that was talking about this, it said, sometimes it's not merciful when God gives us what we want. I think that's something that's just worth pausing on for a second. This wasn't good for Israel. They did not need a king. They should not have wanted a king. But in asking for the king, God gave them what they wanted, even though it wasn't good for them. Okay, that's something we should keep in mind. Why? Only God knows, but this is how he chose to progress redemption, the history of redemption through allowing kings to be in Israel. Most likely so that when Jesus came, he could call himself the true king of Israel, the true king of the church. And so I think we should just read as well verse 22 there. "And the Lord said to Samuel, 'Obey their voice and make them a king.' Samuel then said to the men of Israel, 'Go every man to his city.'" So you've got this situation, they've called out for a king, and God said, well, if you're going to reject me, then I'm going to give you what you want. And it's not going to be good for you. It's going to be horrible. And we'll see that in 1 and 2 Kings next week. It's absolute, utter, sheer, complete faithlessness. While faithful Samuel is standing there in the midst of these people, he's trying to hold everything together. Everyone around him is just saying, nah, we don't want to be faithful. We want something else. We want anything other than faithfulness, really. And that can often happen to us in our situations. We can often be a faithful person in a church where things are not going so faithfully around us. I'm not making any snipes on anyone. I'm not even referring to anything. I just know from experience. I know from other people's experiences. I know from history that often happens. That there is just one guy in a church that's faithful, and he's saying, no, I'm going to stand on the word. I'm going to show these people. I'm going to preach to these people, and they're going to know the truth through this way. And if I succeed in that, wonderful. If I don't succeed in that, I've still done the Lord's word. I'm going to stay faithful to the Lord's work. And so someone here might be in that situation. You might not. I don't know. I'm not pointing fingers. Someone on the recording may be in that situation. Be encouraged by that. If everyone around you is being faithless, it's not you that they've rejected. It's God that they're rejecting. Keep being faithful. And history testifies to people that have stood in those kind of situations, and they've had great success. They've seen God has turned everything around through their ministry. But there's also examples where things have just fallen apart when that person's died, or when they've gone away, or they just served all their lives and made no success, as we might say it. It's not a roadmap to say that if we're faithful in a church full of faithlessness, then everything's going to be fine in the end. But just be encouraged by history that there are plenty of examples of people that remained faithful in the midst of faithlessness, and God did amazing things through their faithfulness. So we end up with Saul as the king of Israel. That happens in chapter 10. And at first it seems great. In chapter 11, he goes to war against the Ammonites, and it's like, wow, he's really taking this king thing seriously, and everything's going to go great. The kingdom's doing well, it's prospering. So he seems to show himself as a great king until 1 Samuel chapter 13. If we read verses 8 through 15. He, that's Saul, waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, "Bring the burnt offering here to me, and the peace offerings." And he offered the burnt offering. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him and greet him. Samuel said, "What have you done?" And Saul said, "When I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offerings. And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." And Samuel arose and went up to Gilgal. The rest of the people went up after Saul to meet the army. They went up from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin, and Saul numbered the people who were present with him, about 600 men. So the idea here is that he was not in the position to make that sacrifice. The Lord made it very clear that it wasn't for him to do that, but he got fed up of waiting for Samuel, basically, and he started getting scared because the people were leaving the army. And he thought, well, if they all leave, then we're not going to have an army left, so I'll just make the sacrifice and everything will be fine, even though he wasn't supposed to. And that's actually quite a lot. Again, this is a lot of stuff coming to my mind as I'm giving this message that I didn't write down. How often does that happen in our churches? The people are scattering, so we start making compromises. We start doing things that we're not supposed to do just to keep people or to draw them back in. Faithfulness means sticking to God's word in all things, regardless of if people stick around or not. And that's what Saul should have done. He should have said, so what? Our history is littered with examples of 300 men going against an entire camp. Abraham, he took 319 men and he rescued Lot from the kings of Mesopotamia. These guys who were massive giants, taller than me, like twice my height. And he took 300 men to go out against those guys in Genesis 14. Gideon and the 300. God has shown himself that he can use a small amount of people to do an amazing thing. And Saul knows that in his history, and he's still scared that they're leaving. And so he sins by making the sacrifice. So Samuel has said that Saul will lose everything for his error, but God is still gracious to his people. Again, we see that. God is gracious. No matter how much his people fail, he's still showing them grace, undeserved mercy. And so he provides another king, a better king, who is King David. Now, David turns out to be an excellent leader who turns Israel around, but Saul becomes very jealous of him. And he's very jealous that David, from a very young age, is showing promise to be a way better leader than he is himself. So he persecutes David. Now, it's important to note, Saul at this point is still the king of Israel, but God has rejected him and chosen David. But politically, at that point, Saul is still in charge of Israel, okay? And so he says, well, if I get rid of David, then this whole promise won't come true, and I will be the great king, and David won't be able to take over. So he tries to kill David. He puts David on the run. And that's all based in jealousy, like the desire to keep his position, even though God has very clearly said to him, this isn't for you anymore. And again, that just makes me think about the jealousy that we have among believers. It's so easy to see God blessing someone else in a way that we want to be blessed and to be very jealous towards them. I remember when I was single, I went to visit a friend in Timișoara, because back in those days I could just hop on a train and no problem. Nowadays I can't do that. But my friend, he'd just come to a reformed position and he wanted this massive library, because what reformed guy doesn't want a massive library, right? And I had that, right? I had like 2,000 books at the time. Don't ask me how many there are now. I lost count years ago, but I had that massive library that he wanted. He had the thing that I wanted most in the world. He had a wife and kids. And so it was just this little thing where he was like, man, I wish I could have the library that you have. And I said, yeah, but I wish I could have the wife and kids that you have. And so,
Trade?
sorry?
Did you trade?
No. No, but I got what I wanted. I don't know if he ever got what he wanted. Probably not. God is good, guys. Both of us in that moment, we just said, well, we'll pray for each other. I'll pray that you get a wife. I'll pray that you get that library that you want. Yeah? That's fraternity among Christians. You have that blessing that I want, but I'm going to rejoice for you because you have that. That's a far cry. Sorry to use myself as that example, because I know it's one of those rare positive examples from my life. But there is so much jealousy. I'm debating with myself as I say this as to whether I should say it publicly, but there is jealousy among leaders left, right, and center these days. On the public sphere, on the internet, in our country, even in this city, there is jealousy among leaders, church leaders. You know, you've got this guy who has this many people in his church and he lords it over them. And then there's this guy with, you know, less people and he's like, oh, let's try and draw more people into my church from those churches. And it's just this ridiculous situation. It's why I'm so glad to work in this church, because we're the only international church in this city, and we're not competing with anyone. So, you know, we're just free from that in that sense. There are other problems, other temptations, of course, and we might not be the only international church in the city one day, and that's okay. But right now, you know, we're a little bit more free from those jealousy temptations than other people are. But what we need to ask ourselves, and this is what the leaders need to ask themselves, which guys like me and Daniel are constantly trying to tell church leaders in this city, are we doing this for God's glory, or are we doing it for our benefit? Are we doing it for God's glory and the people's benefit, or are we doing it for our benefit? Are we trying to genuinely pastor people's souls and help them through their issues and draw them into faith? Are we doing all that for God's glory, or are we doing it because we want to build ourselves reputations? And whether you're a leader or not, that can still fall into for you. And basically what I want to say is faithful people need faithful leaders, not point scorers. We don't need people that are standing in a goal, like defending to stop other people from getting blessings. We don't need people that are trying to shoot goals in the opposite direction. We want to be faithful with what God has given us. And if someone else, even if they have a little bit of a disagreement with us in our theology, if someone else is given the blessing that we want, we should rejoice for them. I was listening to a sermon by John MacArthur a little bit about that recently. You sent it to me, Ramesh, that's right. John 13 about humility and service. And he says in that sermon, he's preaching to a church of like, I don't know, good couple of thousand people, maybe 10,000 people. And he says, what would you guys do if another faithful Christian opened up a church just up the road and they had 5 times the success that we do? Would you be jealous for them, or would you rejoice for what God is doing through their ministry? And that's what we have to ask ourselves. You know, we're here at Ecclesia right now. If someone buys that terrain of land that we've got our eyes on and we could never afford, and they build up a nice big building there, and they build up something that really brings people in, and they're faithfully preaching the gospel, and people are coming to faith, people are being discipled, people are being counseled, ministries are starting up, they're doing great teaching, and people are going there and not to us, are we going to be thankful for that? And just apply that to wherever your church situation is. If that happens in your church, where someone just plants another faithful church right next to you, are you going to rejoice for that? Are you going to want to be their friends, or are you going to see them as an enemy, someone that is against you? And so I just say that because that's exactly the temptation that Saul fell into. He saw David as a threat rather than someone that was going to lead Israel away from his mistakes, and rejoice for that. And I'm preaching to myself here, okay, guys? Because, you know, I'm not a pastor, but I have a certain reputation in this city, and it can be easy for me to be like, right, I've got to defend my reputation. I've got to build my reputation in this city, and then we can do good work. But no, that's not it. If I get a reputation or not, it doesn't matter. If people call me to preach or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is that when I am called to do those things, I'm faithful as I do those things. Apply that to your lives however you need to. And if someone else gets to serve in the way that you want to serve, be thankful for them. So being faithful means being thankful for God's work, even when he uses others to do what we want to do. Saul didn't understand that, and it would cost him his historical reputation and even his life. And that's also just a little encouragement for you. Don't find yourself on the wrong side of the history books because you were jealous of other people. If you're not mentioned in the history books, it doesn't matter. Rejoice for those that God has chosen to use to put them in those history books for other people's benefits down the line. And so Saul dies at the end of 1 Samuel. That's the tragic note that ends on, and then 2 Samuel begins. And that's where the official reign of David comes into play. And I'll just speed through this because I don't want to keep you guys too long. Plus, I need to get my daughter home to bed. So, David works very well to unite Israel and defeat their enemies. If you read 2 Samuel chapter 8 in your own time, you'll see a list of his victories. I don't think that's a complete list, but it's a pretty impressive list as it is. And all was going well with King David's reign until what? Bathsheba. Yeah. So a bunch of you were here over the summer. I don't want to go into the Bathsheba story again because I just did that a couple of months ago with Psalm 53 when I preached that here. And I also then preached it a couple of weeks later in a Romanian church in Vânător. So I'm not interested in retelling the Bathsheba story. Plus, I think William talked a little bit about that on Sunday as well, right? Yeah. So we don't need to rehash that. If you're interested, go and listen to my Psalm 53 sermon on my YouTube channel. You can hear it there. But basically, we all know the story. David sins with Bathsheba, causes this whole conspiracy, and then gets convicted of his sin. And then there's circumstances that he's in because of that sin, which cause him great suffering. And so ultimately, that teaches us that faithful people aren't always faithful. Okay, that's what we saw when we looked at the book of Judges. There are people's names who are recorded in Hebrews 11 as faithful men, and yet when we read their stories, we'd be like, really? Faithful men? No way. And so just keep that in mind, especially when we think about point scoring against other believers and other leaders. Other leaders and other believers, they are going to mess up sometimes. They're not always going to preach the best sermon. They're not always going to lead the best way. They're not always going to lead their ministries the best way. They're not always going to make the best choices. And we're like piranhas ready to jump on those situations and say, oh, let's eat at all that and focus on all that. No, that's not what we're here for, okay? Remember that previous lesson. Even when faithful leaders make faithless mistakes, it doesn't mean that they're overall faithless, okay? And so David has a hard time because of that. His child is killed, and then he ends up on the run again from the hand of his own son, I think. And what I just want to remind you guys of that is throughout all of that trial, all of that suffering, he still remained faithful. He was on the run twice in his life. He had his head being hunted. He had opportunities to assassinate kings so that he could get his position back and chose not to take them. He sinned grievously against God, but he stayed faithful. And if you need proof of that, just turn to Psalm 1 and read until you get to Psalm 150. Some of the headlines on some of those Psalms tell you what he's going through as he's writing this Psalm. He wrote some of those Psalms in some of his most scariest and some of his most faithless times, yet his Psalms show that he was a faithful man overall. And I just want to encourage you guys, there's a sermon. Does anyone know who Austin Duncan is? Probably not. He's at John MacArthur's church. Yeah. He's an elder there. Do you guys know Trinity in Dallas, Texas? No? That's a Baptist church. Yeah. So he preached a sermon there, and I'll put a link to it. But it's really great. It's on Psalm 3, and it just explains like David's life in context of the Psalms, and it's just this brilliant thing. I couldn't do justice to it talking about it, so I'm going to put it here, and you guys can listen to it through the week. But just, like when we read about David's life and then we see the Psalms, and the reason I'm not going to talk too much about that right now is because we will come to the Psalms eventually, and I want to save some of that for them. But just read the Psalms and just look at how faithful David was from the start of his life all the way to the end. And one day I hope someone makes like a chronology of Psalms where all the Psalms are in chronological order so we can see how David kind of evolved in his spirituality over the years. That would be a really wonderful thing if someone could do that. Daniel can write that book. Or maybe I'll do it.
Co-write.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go. Right, get Natty in as well, Brarish. Let's all do it. Take one book of the Psalms each. Yeah, no, just see his faithfulness throughout the Psalms. It's wonderful. And then, if there's any doubt from reading his Psalms, then turn to 2 Samuel 23, and we'll read verses 1 to 7, which are his final words. And if there is any doubt at this point that he remained faithful all of his life, then these final words ought to dispel that. Now, these are the last words of David, the oracle of David, the son of Jesse, the oracle of the man who was raised on high, the anointed of the God of Israel, of Jacob rather, the sweet psalmist of Israel. The Spirit of the Lord speaks by me. His word is on my tongue. The God of Israel has spoken. The rock of Israel has said to me, when one rules justly over men, ruling in the fear of God, he dawns on them like the morning light, like the sun shining forth on a cloudless morning, like rain that makes grass to sprout from the earth. For does not my house stand so with God? For he has made an everlasting covenant with me. ordered in all things and secure. For will he not cause to prosper all my help and my desire? But worthless men are all like thorns that are thrown away, for they cannot be taken with the hand. But the man who touches them arms himself with iron and the shaft of a spear, and they are utterly consumed with fire. Faithfulness, right? A faithful man, even though sons are persecuting him, people are turning against him all his life, faithful. That's what faithfulness looks like. Doesn't matter what the circumstances are of life, I'm going to focus on God, and I'm going to trust in him. So mistakes were made, surely they were made. Awful mistakes, which all of history can now read about, embarrassing mistakes that he made. But he ended in faithfulness. And that's a reminder to us as we seek to be faithful while the nation around us resists God, rejects him even. As everyone around us says, why would you believe in this God who does this and that? Why would you not allow us to live this way because your God in the sky says this? And they live with their sin, and they live with their abhorration and their active dislike and hatred towards our God, which they rub in our faces all the time. Remember, it's not them that we need to worry about. It's ourselves we need to focus on. We need to be faithful by focusing all of that self-attention on our God, who has constantly proven throughout the Bible that he is ultimately faithful, and trusting in that faithfulness for our souls as well. So let the world burn around us. Let the world turn to chaos. Doesn't concern us. We must remain faithful. And so then a couple of chapters later, we see David dies. Solomon, his son, takes over. And the question at this point is, will Solomon keep up David's good work, or will he trash it completely? Find out next time. Amen.